Hi friends, so I wanted to share with you some of Craig Murray's experience of his of being at the Assange hearing, the extradition hearing in court in the UK. It's very sad, and really it's almost like we are watching. It's like a documentation of the gradual torture and slow death of Julian Assange. And I blame the Australian government for abandoning him. And only just recently there was a few politicians, Senator Andrew Wilkie, Senator Barnaby Joyce, of all people, and a few others that have been calling for him to be brought to Australia. I don't know what's taken them so long. It's been 8 years. The Australian politicians here are just US lackeys, most of them. They just do whatever the US wants. And the same goes for this Westminster Magistrates Court and the judge that was overseeing these proceedings. Basically, they're all just following the instructions of the Trump administration, but it would be the same if it was Obama. Obama was the one that actually was, despite saying he wasn't going to crack down on whistleblowers, was actually somebody who was really cracking down on them. So anyway, Assange in Court, this is the name of the title of the essay, and I'll leave a link to it. It's by Craig Murray, craigmurray.org.uk. And I won't read all of it, but it's comprehensive, and I'm just going to read his experience of what he saw of Julian Assange and how badly his state is. I was deeply shaken while witnessing yesterday's events in Westminster Magistrates Court. Every decision was railroaded through over scarcely heard arguments and objections of Assange legal team by the magistrate, who barely pretended to be listening. Before I go on to the blatant lack of fair process, the first thing I must note was Julian's condition. I was badly shocked by just how much weight my friend had lost, by the speed of his hair his hair has receded, and by the appearance of premature and vastly accelerated aging. He has a pronounced limp I have never seen before. Since his arrest, he has lost over 15 kilograms in weight. But his physical appearance was not as shocking as his mental deterioration. When asked to give his name and date of birth, he struggled visibly over several seconds to recall both. I will come to the important content of his statement at the end of the proceedings in due course. But his difficulty in making it was very evident. It was a real struggle for him to articulate the words and focus his train of thought. Until recently, I had always been quietly skeptical of those who claimed that Julian's treatment amounted to torture, even of Niels Melzer, the UN Special Rapporteur on torture, and skeptical of those who suggested he may be subject to debilitating drug treatments. But having attended the trials in Uzbekistan of several victims of extreme torture, having worked with survivors from Sierra Leone and elsewhere, I can tell you that yesterday changed my mind entirely, and Julian exhibited exactly the symptoms of a torture victim brought blinking into the light, particularly in terms of disorientation, confusion, and the real struggle to assert free will through the fog of learned helplessness. I had been even more skeptical of those who claimed, as a senior member of his legal team did to me on Sunday night, that they were worried that Julian might not live to the end of the extradition process. I now find myself not only believing it, but haunted by the thought. Everybody in that court yesterday saw that one of the greatest journalists, the most important dissidents of our times, is being tortured to death by the state before our eyes. To see my friend, the most articulate man, the fastest thinker I have ever known, reduced to that shambling and incoherent wreck was unbearable. Yet the agents of the state, particularly the callous magistrate Vanessa Barretser, were not just prepared but eager to be part of this blood sport. She actually told him that if he were incapable of following proceedings, that his lawyers could explain what happened to him later. What had happened to him later. The question of why a man who, by the very charges against him, was acknowledged to be highly intelligent and competent, had been reduced by the state to somebody incapable of following court proceedings gave her not a millisecond of concern. The charge against Julian is very specific, conspiring with Chelsea Manning to publish the Iran war logs, the Afghanistan war logs, and the State Department cables. The charges are nothing to do with Sweden, nothing to do with sex, and nothing to do with the 2016 US election, a simple clarification the mainstream media appears incapable of understanding. The purpose of yesterday's hearing was case management to determine the timetable for the extradition proceedings. The key points at issue were that Julian's defense was requesting more time to prepare their evidence and arguing that political offenses were specifically excluded from the extradition treaty. There should, they argued, therefore be a preliminary hearing to determine whether the extradition treaty applied at all. Anyway, I won't read all of this. I hope that you will check it out. I'll leave a link to it, craigmurray.org.uk, and I'll just read the end part of this. I'll just read some of the end part of it. And by the way, they're going to do the next hearing in Belmarsh prison, in the court there, or some sort of court set up there, and they're not going to really allow anybody really to witness it. So that's going to be a kangaroo court. This is just appalling, and my government, the Australian government, is just letting this happen. You know, it's just sort of disgraceful. And so anyway, Assange's defense team objected strenuously to the move to Belmarsh, in particular on the grounds that there were no conference rooms available there to consult their client, and they have very inadequate access to him in the jail. Barretzer dismissed their objection offhand and with a very definite smirk. See, I mean, these people are just absolutely taking direction from the US government. And when Julian Assange, finally Barretzer returned to Julian Assange and ordered him to stand and asked him if he had understood the proceedings. He replied in the negative, said that he could not think, and gave every appearance of disorientation. Then he seemed to find an inner strength, drew himself up a little and said, "I do not understand how this process is equitable. This superpower had 10 years to prepare for this case, and I can't even access my writings. It is very difficult where I am to do anything. These people have unlimited resources." The effort that then seemed to become too much. His voice dropped and he became increasingly confused and incoherent. He spoke of whistleblowers and publishers being labelled enemies of the people, then spoke about his children's DNA being stolen and of being spied on in his meeting with his psychologist. I am not suggesting at all that Julian was wrong about these points, but he could not properly frame nor articulate them. He was plainly not himself, very ill, and it was just horribly painful to watch. Barretzer showed neither sympathy nor the least concern. She tartly observed that if he could not understand what had happened, his lawyers could explain it to him, and she swept out of court. The whole experience was profoundly upsetting. It was very plain that there was no genuine process of legal consideration happening here. What we had was a naked demonstration of the power of the state and a naked dictation of the proceedings by the Americans. Julian was in the box behind bulletproof glass, and I and 30-odd other members of the public who had squeezed in were in a different box behind more bulletproof glass. I do not know if he could see me or his other friends in the court, or if he was capable of recognizing anybody. He gave no indication that he did. In Belmarsh prison, he is kept in complete isolation for 23 hours a day. He is permitted 45 minutes of exercise. If he has to be moved, they clear the corridors before he walks down them, and they lock all the cell doors to ensure he has no contact with any other prisoner outside the short and strictly supervised exercise period. There is no possible justification for this inhumane regime, used on major terrorists, being imposed on a publisher who is a remand prisoner. I have been both cataloguing and protesting for years the increasingly authoritarian powers of the UK state, but that the most gross abuse could be so open and undisguised is still a shock. The campaign of demonisation and dehumanisation against Julian Assange based on government and media lie after government and media lie has led to this situation where he can be slowly killed in public sight and arraigned on a charge of publishing the truth about government wrongdoing while receiving no assistance from quote-unquote liberal society. Unless Julian is released shortly, he will be destroyed. If the state can do this, then who is next? So that's Craig Murray. bit about Craig Murray to you. Craig Murray is an author, broadcaster, and human rights activist. He was British ambassador to Uzbekistan from August 2002 to October 2004, and rector of the University of Dundee from 2007 to 2010. So anyway, the title of that is Assange in Court. So anyway, that's sort of really, really disturbing and not surprising. And, you know, I sort of feel at this point that he is probably going to, that they are correct. He's probably quite possibly going to die of just the illness, the psychological and physical torture that he has been through in the last 8 years, the 7 years in the Ecuadorian embassy, where toward the end there with Lenin Moreno as president of Ecuador, it was he was constantly surveilled by and prompted by the CIA to do so, and this Spanish security company that was you know, basically doing the Ecuadorian embassy was transferring all the information that they had surveilled on Julian Assange, all his meetings with doctors, his meetings with his lawyers and all of that, and with John Pilger, the journalist, and all of that, they were sending it to the CIA. So that is, you know, that's the state of, this is how powerful the US empire is and how far-reaching their tentacles are, you know, to want of a better word. You know, they have their fingers in so many pies, and they're absolute bullies. They're like the mafia. They're worse than the mafia, and the CIA is worse than the mafia, and this is what they're doing to somebody who is basically helping whistleblowers, is basically publishing content that is provided to him and WikiLeaks by whistleblowers, which is a very, very important act for any sort of press freedom, for the press. It's imperative that the press are able to do that, and they do that all the time, all over the world. And it is very important for democracy to have that. And sadly, it's taken ages for the mainstream media, the corporate-owned media, to even say anything about this. In fact, The Guardian has helped put Julian Assange where he is. They were happy to take the information from Julian Assange, and then they threw him under the bus. And the corporate mainstream media have allowed you know, him to get to this point, and then suddenly they start freaking out because they think it could happen to them. Well, of course it could happen to them. If it, as Craig Murray said, who's next? Exactly. They can, whoever is a whistleblower, and Chelsea Manning is currently in prison, being fined $1,000 a day for every day she's in prison by the time she gets out, if they let her get out. She's already been in prison for 7 years, and they put her in again to force her to testify against Julian Assange, and she refuses to do so. And so she's being, by the time she gets out, it's going to be $400,000 worth of fines. I mean, this is the sort of bullies this US empire is. This is the sort of awful, awful things that they're doing to people who are basically heroes. Like Julian Assange is a hero, so is Chelsea Manning, and you don't have to like Julian Assange. You just have to recognize that this is a matter of press freedom. It is a matter of a democracy, that he and any publisher should be able to publish whistleblower information, so that we can challenge the national security state, we can challenge the corporate state, we can challenge corruption, like the corruption of Hillary Clinton, and that's what WikiLeaks did, release the Podesta emails provided by possibly Seth Rich, but it was provided by somebody within the DNC, but they turned it into a whole Russiagate narrative because they were embarrassed, and they turned it all into Russia, Russia, Russia. This is, if you don't have publishers like WikiLeaks, if you don't have publishers that are going to help whistleblowers, facilitate whistleblowers to get information out there, then we do not have any semblance of democracy. It's bad enough now that basically the fourth estate is pretty much dead. And they're just stenographers for the state. They just do whatever the government, they just write whatever the government tells them to write. There is no journalism really in Australia. Barely. So anyway, it's very sad to see because, I mean, there was a time there where I sort of thought there was a glimmer of hope, but I feel like now we're just watching the disintegration of a person, the torture in public view, as Craig Murray says, the torture and the ongoing attempted murder, which will probably be successful. Because if he doesn't die before the extradition process is finished, he will die when he is extradited to the US, because they will make it absolutely so unbearable, even more so than it is now. And it's already considered torture by the Special Rapporteur, Niels Melzer, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture. He already says it is torture, what they've been putting him through. And so it'll only get worse, and he won't survive. If he doesn't die before he leaves the UK, he will die in the US not long after. So it's sort of appalling, and I hold every Australian politician responsible for this, even the ones that have spoken out just recently, because it's been 8 years in the making this. That man has been through so much terrible, such a absolute torturous existence, and he's been abandoned by my government. They've abandoned an Australian citizen to the wolves, basically. The wolves of this national security state, the CIA and all of that. They basically just abandoned a publisher to be ripped apart and destroyed mentally and physically. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. Anybody who has allowed this to happen, shame on you all. Shame on you. And I hope if he dies, and he probably will, I hope his memory comes to haunt you in your dreams. It's appalling. Anyway, my name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Please subscribe if you haven't already and click the notifications bell, otherwise you won't receive any notifications when I drop a video. I'm not posting much lately because it's very busy here where I am, and it's spring and I have a lot of things to do, but I try to get one out at least once a week. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. I always enjoy your comments. Till next time, my name's Trish Roberts. Bye for now.